Coming to our last presentation for today, development of multilingual education components for a chairside multilingual oral health literacy assessment tool.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Parisa Brahimi, and I'm honored to be presenting our research topic titled Development of Educational Components for a Chairside Multilingual Oral Health Literacy Assessment Tool. This research was conducted under the guidance of our mentor, Dr. Romana Mueller. On the behalf of our team, I would like to express our gratitude for her hard work and invaluable guidance throughout this project, as we could have not have done this without her help. The student team members are Stephanie Trevino, Jack Joe Kent, Lamia Tanovic, Nicole Karras, and Pedro Majbula. Next slide, please. The importance of our research topic cannot be overstated, as we all have encountered situations where we struggle to communicate with our patients effectively. Despite how hard we try and we put our best effort, we often find ourselves in a situation where the patients just nod awkwardly, and you can just tell that they're completely lost when we're trying to explain something to them. So this brings us to our research topic, research question that we asked: what educational components are appropriate for use with oral health literacy assessment tools used by linguistically diverse patients at the St. Louis Dental Center? The aim of our study is to develop educational components for a chairside multilingual oral health literacy assessment tool. Next slide, please. In our project and our research, we had two objectives. The first one was to develop educational components for use with multilingual oral health assessments tool used by linguistically diverse patients, which we accomplished. And the second one was to conduct a pilot test to measure the effectiveness of the educational components by conducting a pre-test and a post-test using the existing multilingual chairside oral health assessment tools. The pre-test pilot was completed. However, the post-test will be completed in the future. Our goal was to complete the post-test as well. However, we did encounter some issues during the course of our research, which is why we had to move our timeline and were not able to complete the post-test. The first reason was the installation of the oral health literacy assessment tools into Qualtrics and Qualtrics reporting, and also incorporating Spanish oral health assessment tools and outputs from Qualtrics, which took about 8 weeks. The second reason was the setup of the electronic tablets, which took around 4 weeks. And lastly was the lack of a dummy code in the EDR to track the oral health literacy assessment, administration, and intervention. And finally, the development of the educational components took longer than expected. Next slide, please. Our study design was interventional and quantitative. Our study subjects were patients of the St. Louis Dental Center who spoke English, Spanish, or both, and they were all 18 years old or older. The participants were recruited by the 3rd and the 4th year dental students, and the patients who agreed to participate in our study were given electronic tablets to complete an online Qualtrics survey. The study location was at the St. Louis Dental Center, and the surveys were administered chairside through an online platform linked to a Qualtrics using tablets. In the data collection process, data will not be collected during the development of multilingual educational components. However, data will be collected during pilot testing of the effectiveness of components through a pre and a post test of the existing multilingual chairside oral health assessment tools. The patient's electronic dental records will be used to collect patients' demographic information, and the data will be entered into a password-protected Google Sheet and will be de-identified prior to analysis conducted by the biostatisticians. Next slide, please. We had two research methodologies. First was the educational component development, which each of our team members selected a number of terms from the oral health assessment surveys, and each of these educational components were developed while incorporating the definition of the terms, an image with or without labels, and a minute or two video describing the term or the procedure, which we have kind of like the example up there on the slide. To prepare the component for translation, the video captions were typed and separated by sequence of the start and end, by sequence, and the start and end time was noted for each section. Eventually, each educational component will be uploaded to electronic tablets and organized by term numbers for easy and quick chairside access. And the next step would be to translate all these educational components to different languages. Next slide, please. And our second research methodology was pilot testing for assessment tools. The chairside oral health literacy assessment surveys were translated to Spanish, and they were uploaded into Qualtrics in English and Spanish. Additionally, informed consents were developed, and they were translated into Spanish and uploaded into Qualtrics. 3 groups of patients of 18 years and older who met the selection criteria took the survey. The selection of the participant followed a convenience sampling method. The survey was administered to chairside using electronic tablets to English speakers, Spanish speakers, and also bilingual patients who spoke both Spanish and English. And this survey was taken based on their language preferences. And then the data was stored in Qualtrics and analyzed after the completion of the pilot test. Next slide, please. So these are the examples of the educational components. As you can see, these terminologies were carefully chosen, and these terms are the most common terms used in dentistry. Next slide, please. The result of our pilot testing of the oral health assessment tools were interesting. We had in total 28 English-speaking patients, 10 Spanish-only speaking patients, and 4 bilingual speaking patients that took the test. And their score was based on how many terms they got correct at the end of the pretest. The mean and the range score for the English-only speaking patients were 55%, and the range was 0 to 43. Spanish-only speaking patients was 46%, with a range of 17 to 29. And bilingual speaking patients was 37.8%, and range was 11 to 25. The difference in the knowledge of dental terms between Spanish and English bilingual patients was English at 37.6% and Spanish tests at 38%. The top words who were missed was xerostomia. Only 2 out of 47 patients got the word xerostomia right. And the second one was gutta percha. Third was occlusion. 4 was fistula, and 5 was sulcus. The 5 words that the patient were really familiar with was gingivitis. 43 out of 47 people got it correct. Floss, crown, ulcer, and extractions were also there were terms that they were familiarized with. Next slide, please. So due to time constraint and other unforeseen circumstances, the development of the educational components and their translation to Spanish were not completed in time to conduct the pre and post tests using the components as intervention. However, the pre-test assessments were completed as a pilot. The sample size and the number of language in which the data is collected will increase over time, and as more translation of the assessment tools are conducted and more potential study participants are identified in the clinic. And the next step will be to include translation of educational components to Spanish and other languages, and administration of pre and post tests using components as an intervention. Next slide, please. In the discussion, I would like to mention that according to the studies conducted by Azoto et al. And Hamilton et al., it was concluded that the dental patient's understanding of dental and medical terms, as well as oral health conditions, vary, and there's a need for educational interventions that will increase the health literacy and oral health literacy of individuals seeking dental health. Additionally, investigative pilot studies conducted in our clinic assessing oral health literacy of dental patients confirmed low oral health literacy of English-speaking and non-speaking patients indicating need for an interventional oral health literacy educational program. Next slide, please. So in the conclusion, we surveyed dental patients at the St. Louis Dental Center. Surveyed dental patients at the St. Louis centers have low oral health literacy. The phenomenon's occurrence seems to be in agreement with existing studies. Spanish-speaking and bilingual patients have a lower oral health literacy, on average 46% and 37.8% respectively, than the English-speaking patients, which have 55%. The data collected during the pilot's pretest oral health literacy survey warrants educational program intervention, and our team developed educational components that are suitable for chairside administration via electronic tablets. And further data, pretest and post-it collection will be conducted with the implementation of educational components in order to fill gaps in comprehension of dental and medical terms. Next slide, please. Well, thank you for listening to our presentation, and we want to especially thank our biostatistician, Mark Grady, Lisa Norman, Mr. Jordan from ATSU Qualtrics team, Mr. Michael from the Mozo IT team, student Dr. Lysandra for Spanish translation, and all of the D3 and the D4 students who assisted us in the oral health survey administration. And lastly, this project would have not been possible without the financial support of the AT Still internal grants and without the grant funding from the Lutheran Foundation of St. Louis. We're now open to questions. Thank you. Yes, Doctor.
The question I have, you talked about, I think, the most difficult one was, I forgot what you said as far as, but there's like several terms, occlusion, xerostomia, which might have been the one you said was the most difficult one, occlusion. There's several I can think of that are difficult terms to explain to English-speaking patients in English, and of course, now you're talking about translating. I was wondering if the ones that were more difficult to explain to a patient were the same when they were explained, say, by an English-speaking provider to an English-speaking person. If the order of those things changed at all because of the translation, or did it seem to be the same difficulties whether or not they were being translated?
So this was kind of just like like when we got the results back, this was like a combination of both like English, Spanish, and the bilingual. And this was out of like 47 who had taken this like in total, the xerostomia in either in English, Spanish, or bilingual patients were the ones that were missed. Like the 5, the xerostomia, gutta percha, occlusion, fistula, and sulcus were the most missed. Like we had the way we had it on the survey, it was like we would put the name and we're like, and we would have 4 options as answers. We're like, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you see these words? So the answer is that only like 2 people out of 47 patients got those correct. And that was just like in general from
they were all put into basically the same
English,
group. Okay.
right? Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Any other questions?